Hello!
Hello, all. Welcome to Thursday night Generational Change live stream. I'm Jen.
I'm Pedro. And here comes the sun. And here comes a very controversial topic that apparently a lot of you want to get into.
I don't really think of it as that controversial, but
I think
people want to argue about it.
Yeah, but again, it's like, is there an overpopulation problem? Yes, not in the sense that people are thinking of. They're thinking like, oh, is there a global overpopulation issue? No, that's not the issue. The issue, of course, is that there are way too many people centered in very specific areas.
And we were just saying, and if you ever have driven in Pembroke Pines, you know what that feels like.
100%.
There's way too many people.
And especially at this time of the year. You know, usually yesteryear, one thing that I did talk about, hey, everybody, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hey, Josh. Hey, Christina. Thanks for checking in. Elvira, John, Cheyenne. Oh, everybody's here. So keep hitting that like button. Let's spread the word. Got to get as many people on here as we can.
We should start. What are we going to start?
Overpopulation is not a myth. We will talk about that, not in the sense of what you're thinking of. Reducing population is probably the easiest thing humanity can do to give it and our planet some time to evolve. That's not really the answer either. Well, I am sure we'll listen anyway. I've never really heard this stuff before anyway. Yes, John, okay. Thank you for having the attitude of let's learn something new if we can.
Yeah.
And so do not blame Jen under any circumstances. You want to blame anybody? You blame me.
I didn't even know this person. So I have no idea. I have since done some research, but no, here's the thing. When we have people on this show, it's to engage in an informational discussion for educational purposes. It's not an endorsement. It's not my sworn loyalty to a point of view. And so really, when we're doing that, it's for educational. I'm not taking a stand on an issue. If I take a stand, I'll let everybody know that I'm taking a stand. I'm not taking a stand. It's just, food for thought.
I think it is very important to have food for thought. And I think it's very important that people recognize one of the things that is an issue when it comes to the question of population is the question of carbon footprint. Now, if you were to look at parts of this, just look at this country, for example, look at where there is a significant overpopulation issue. Southeast Florida is a great example of that. And look at a state like Montana, which is very wide open. If you were to look at the carbon footprint here versus there, you would notice a significant difference. So that's what we mean by overpopulation, not that we have to start euthanizing people. Somebody actually started saying stuff like that.
I got to tell you, I've met some people that...
well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But the question here, of course, is, we've obviously got a lot of topics to get into. We've got not just Paul, but I think we can...
Wait, I didn't tell you I was doing that one.
The dunce cap?
No.
Oh, there's another one. U.S. military leaves scarf in it. Is that true?
But it's so funny. I just had to. And then this, I thought, this is actually true, and yet it's still entertaining to me.
So we're gonna jump into news and amuse because I think it's the only thing that we really, at this moment, it's a very important topic. Look. There are a lot of places that we can start, but one of them that I think we absolutely have to address is yesterday we went to Fort Lauderdale. We did a rally for the Fight for 15. For those of you who may or may not know Linda Joseph, she is the primary liaison for Fight for 15 South Florida. She is a tremendous activist. She is somebody who definitely puts in the work.
Check out our interview with her. We have had Linda on the show on our Uplifting Labor segment. You could definitely check her out on there.
And I think it went really well.
I love a good march and rally with Linda.
Well, Jen had the opportunity to speak, and that, of course, I think went over very well. Just my opinion. But ultimately,
notice how I'm always the person who doesn't need to use the megaphone.
Well, that's true. You were like, I don't need this. I could just do my thing.
Well, I mean, I've been told I'm a little loud, so I might as well use that to my advantage. But I've never done very well with megaphones.
One of the things that I did notice yesterday was that the construction workers seemed to want to drill like right at the time that people wanted to talk. I don't want to get in any.
I don't think so, because they weren't like working for McDonald's.
No.
So I don't think so.
But they certainly were, they made it a little bit more difficult. So you projecting loud was obviously a good thing.
Right. Oh, I'm loud. So the Fight for 15, what's interesting is when we first got there, before it started, I was actually speaking with the owner of that McDonald's, and he was a nice guy. He came out and he saw my Fight for 15 shirt, And he said, you guys already got that. What else do you, what are you doing? Because Florida, we voted for an amendment that has, forced a $15 minimum wage. That's in another 4 years that'll happen. So it's not like it's right now anyway. But a couple of things. One, that doesn't address the national minimum wage issue. We need a federal minimum wage. Okay, so for one. And the other thing I want people to know about is that McDonald's has recently done some really nice PR work for themselves, and they claim that they've given their employees a $15 minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And that's what it looks like. It looks like that in writing.
But it's not true.
But it isn't really correct. So what happened is that McDonald's is now giving a $15 an hour minimum wage to people that work in their corporate stores. But here's the catch, is that 95% of McDonald's are not corporate, they're franchised. So for them to say we're giving a $15 minimum wage gives this idea that, wow, McDonald's workers are all going to be bad. No, our McDonald's workers here in Fort Lauderdale make $8.15 an hour in Fort Lauderdale. That's just absurd. That's just, I don't know. It's absurd. So we had a good rally yesterday. I thought it was good.
And I think we definitely got a very good response.
I pulled a nice speech out of my butt.
No, you did. But we still ultimately ended up having a lot of people drive by that were in support, but also a lot of people who were not in support. And they really think that this is like something detrimental for people to make a living wage. It's just so ironic how people who consider themselves conservative don't want people to make a living wage. Regardless of what the job is, the society has changed so much where it used to just be you were criticized for not having a job. Now it's your job isn't good enough. And as far as I can tell, you want people to be paid enough to live so they don't have to depend on the government. Well,
it's that, but it's also this complete disrespect. So you want people to do those jobs, but yet you don't think they're jobs worthy of doing because you don't think they're worthy of being paid for. So does that mean that you think that we should go back to like a feudal, serf and lord system? Are we, what's the plan? So you want people to do jobs, but they shouldn't be compensated so that they can live. So I'm not understanding that. And then you also don't want to provide people with a security safety net, social service or whatever, to keep everybody above a line of dignity.
Well, I think that also speaks to an even bigger
Wouldn't
problem.
we rather just pay people and have them be working and paying for themselves? Wouldn't we just rather people be able to work and support themselves?
You would think that would be the case. Well, and what I can tell you is that a lot of people now, and this is why this is the first article that we're talking about, which is changed by the pandemic, many workers will not return to their old jobs. So many of you have obviously heard the stories recently as it pertains to people don't want to go back to work, and
people are lazy. They're just going to enjoy living off of
so
this.
We're going to force them
end their unemployment benefits.
Yep. So we're going to force them back to work, and here's how we're going to do it. We're going to remove their unemployment benefits after what they've dealt with for the past year via the pandemic. And President Biden is okay with this. So as far as I can see, they would much rather side with shareholders and management than with workers, force them to go back to work for menial wages.
And by the way, in crappy ass jobs,
correct.
Let's be real. They don't care that there is something greater to life than working to exist. And
I agree.
And until we get to that point, there is no real freedom here. This is not freedom. This is just sort of slavery, but where you're transporting yourself to and from your job, I guess. But I don't, yeah, there are people that have been collecting unemployment, and yeah, they don't want to go back to their crappy ass job because they realize that life is short, their job sucks, and they're not paid enough. And you know what? They're right. So, it isn't that people are lazy. One of the women that spoke yesterday, who's a McDonald's employee, she got up and spoke. This woman works 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Including her job at McDonald's. She works 3 jobs and is still behind on rent. And that is the opposite of lazy. So these are working people that have no problem working, but they just, they're starting to recognize that they're needed and recognize their value and not want to be taken advantage of anymore.
It's also the other factor, of course, is gentrification. That is a very big part of the process.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes people could be living in an area for a certain amount of time and they're fine there, but then the next thing you know, the cost of living doubles, triples, or quadruples, and then, you know, over the course of a few years, and you just don't even see it coming. It just happens gradually, or sometimes it happens and it accelerates. And look, it's not so easy. I mean, look, I'm cut from a different cloth. Like I can literally,
yes, you are.
I can literally pick up and go, and I'll go live somewhere, anywhere, quite frankly. But most people are not like that.
He's kind of like a hobo.
That had nothing to do with what I was saying. But of course,
you do sleep in your car sometimes.
If I have to, then I do. That's different.
Point is, you can pick up and go anywhere. Yes.
Yes. And of course, a lot of people don't want to do that. They like where they are and they want to be able to, you know, again, this is the thing about community and being able to connect with people. One of the biggest problems we have here in South Florida is that it is an extremely expensive place to live in many, many parts. And it's very transient. A lot of people do not stay here very long, and most people are not born here. So they're not planting their roots here. That's why Jen is an anomaly.
I'm an anomaly.
You know, second generation South Floridian, and a sort of like a dying breed in many ways. And so, you know, people are either coming here from another place, or the people who have been here, they're leaving. So understanding this factor of why we want people to be paid a living wage. And you can make the argument, well, a $15 minimum wage is not necessary in Casper, Wyoming. Okay, maybe that might be true. But in South Florida, $15 an hour is maybe getting you above the poverty level.
You know,
maybe.
And I have no problem with policies that address disparities in location. I think that it's okay if you set that minimum wage needs to be whatever percentage of median income in the location, and have that. That's fine. I don't necessarily think somebody living in New York needs to make the same money as somebody living in Casper, Wyoming.
I agree.
So I mean, we can, but there is a way to do that. But the point is, and that's why I'm kind of not psyched on the whole that they say fight for 15, because really what we need is a living wage.
Correct.
15 really isn't high enough. They've been asking for that for so many years. At this point, it really should be more like 20 at minimum. And so, a living wage. And I'm okay with that fluctuating in different places. Like I would be amenable to such policies, because I do think that's reasonable.
Another thing that
where are you going today?
I'm gonna jump around in a second, but I think that the best place for us to take it in the next progressive step, of course, is with Katie Porter. You know, everything as it relates to cost of living.
I love her.
It's all connected. It's all interconnected, and the topic of healthcare is becoming more and more front and center. More and more front.
Let me just say, people, if you have not ever watched Katie Porter questioning these CEOs, and this isn't the first time, there's multiple examples of this. Please do yourself a favor. Find yourself a video clip of Katie Porter questioning these CEOs, because she's subtle but brilliant, and she's so good, and she just gets them to look like such idiots, and she gets them to walk into it, and she's so good.
And I think what's great about Katie Porter compared to a lot of others is that Katie is an equal opportunity offender. And what I mean is Katie does not just single out the GOP. She singles out the makers and shakers of our society. Going after the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, they don't give a damn who's in elected office as long as they are under their thumb. She's
about economic justice, and so economic justice, and so really her. Really the target of what she's always aiming for are always these shyster and capitalist leader oligarch people that are sitting on golden parachutes while their workers aren't even allowed to unionize.
Also one of the biggest problems. That's why they are able to act with such reckless abandon, because they know that there's no way they're going to get in trouble. And even if they did, they're going to get a slap on the wrist. They'll pay a high, a $2,000 an hour major law firm to get everything swept away.
Yeah.
You'll pay a major fine. You're not going to do jail time. You'll do community service.
But she's so good. And she really gets all of her little ducks in a row before she does this, like spot on. I would have liked to watch her litigate a case at some point. I don't know if I think she was. I know she's an attorney, and I do believe she was a litigator, but I would love to see her doing like cross-examination on somebody. It would be really cool.
Yeah. And she is definitely as good a bright, she's as bright a light as you're going to find in the political arena. And of course, she, like I said, she did her thing the other day. If you haven't seen it, Ali, crap.
Basically, the gist of it is that she was going after in the pharmaceutical industry, and she was questioning their CEO about the different allocations of money, and how much they spend on R&D, how much they spend on advertising. And this guy really just came off looking like such an idiot.
He didn't really want to answer the question.
Of course,
but I got to tell
doesn't.
you, when she got to him to admit how much they spend every year on advertising and marketing, it's in the tens of millions of dollars. But the truth is, they spend that kind of money because they know the return on investment is always going to be on the upside, and that's what it comes down to.
But their biggest, the biggest problem is that they're constantly crying, not poor, I guess, but that they need to have these prices because of all the money on R&D. But here's the thing. The money on R&D comes from our taxes. Yeah. We pay for that research, and then they get a patent on it. And then we also have to pay them exorbitant prices for the money, for the drugs that our money helped create. And she's just not standing for it. And it was really cool.
No, and she did a really great job. And of course, when it comes to justice, we don't know if anything is going to happen to Trump and his family, but the New York Attorney General, for whatever reason, her name is slipping me right now, but she's very politically ambitious. So there could be,
so they've upped the case. So now we know that they are it's not just an investigation, it's a criminal investigation.
Yeah, so Trump's definitely in some hot water now. And it's really just a question of, whether they're going to get him or whether this case ultimately sets precedents going forward, which is obviously what you hope for. You hope that if Trump does ultimately suffer the consequences from this. I mean, look, there are backroom deals that are made all the time. I still maintain that the ultimate backroom deal with Trump is going to be that he doesn't get to run for president again.
Well, I think, and ultimately, that's what this is all about. I think that really what they're trying to do is prevent him from being able to run again and keep him so tied up.
And they may very well do that because if, again.
And these are all probably extremely legitimate and credible claims.
Correct.
Here's the thing. For every rat you see, there's 50 you don't. If this is the information, and also, if they're confident enough to be sort of going public with the idea that they're looking into him with criminal charges, then they're pretty confident. And what's interesting with him is that how many times do you think he's done something and gotten away with it versus when he gets caught, right? Thousands. So the fact that they have something on him that they think is actually, going to stick is interesting.
Well,
and maybe it is a distraction. I don't know.
There is never a shortage of things that he has managed to get himself into.
Oh no, he's a complete criminal.
No, he is, but he does it with such impunity, and that's what drives people nuts. He really is just that type of person who doesn't care. And a lot of people don't like that. They like their criminals to be a little bit more on the DL when it comes to that type of behavior.
Well, that's always the thing with Trump is he says the quiet part out loud. You're not supposed to say that.
But you really should, because we really are.
Like,
we're living in such
we're in Syria. They're regarding the oil.
Yeah, totally guarding the oil.
Yeah, thank you. We're not there because we care about them having a chemical attack. We could not care less.
He has something to say about
good God. Here he comes.
There is no way I am going down. Believe me when I tell you, this is just a distraction.
See the handcuffs?
It is. I've never met a pair of handcuffs I didn't like, but not for those reasons. I really appreciate this opportunity.
That's what your friend Jeffrey Epstein says about you.
He doesn't know me. I never met him. He's total fabrication, fake news, totally fake news. But in terms of whether or not I'm going down, Trump never goes down. Trump stays up top, always up top. And I like being on top. Just ask the ladies. And in terms of where we go forward, this is just a distraction. I'm going to be back in a big way. Believe me when I tell you, never getting in trouble. They are just trying. It's a total left-wing conspiracy. Big left-wing conspiracy. They just don't like me. And they're afraid I'm going to run again, and I'm totally going to win. Believe me, if I run again, I'm going to win. And they know it, and they don't want me to run. So they got to stop me now. Anyway,
I'm going to give you the hook.
I got to go. I got to go talk to my attorneys. Not for anything related to doing anything wrong.
Okay.
Totally not anything wrong. See you later.
But I do think he's in trouble.
So what is that? But that doesn't mean that they are canceling the Olympics, right?
No,
because I
think it's very important because, again, the issue of COVID, we try to be as reasonable and as diplomatic about the issue as we possibly can, because we know that there's still this mass hysteria that is surrounding this issue. But one of the things we've always found interesting is you get people who have gotten the vaccination and yet they want to wear their mask. When you see people wearing masks in their car, there is this fear of living that is something that I just don't understand. And it's not something that I will ever understand because I think it's pointless, but that's a whole other story. Now, apparently, the issue of COVID, and I'm only going to guess that it has something to do with the new variant strands that have been discovered. There are doctors in Tokyo that are calling for the cancellation of the Olympics. That's how serious.
Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. The thing is, I feel bad for athletes that train their whole lives for this, but to be honest,
I agree.
The Olympics does nothing but bankrupt so many countries. Like, it's just such a.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I'm not really familiar. Well, like how that works exactly.
Well, the amount of money that countries have to invest into infrastructure to be able to host an Olympics, they don't make that back, and they end up going into. In fact, that was sort of, I don't know if it was like the straw that broke the camel's back in Greece, in Athens, but that's what happens. I know in Vancouver, they were able to sort of recoup to some extent, but there's no money to be made. And then the facilities just basically sit there like abandoned ghost towns, like old Olympic villages and stuff like that. So it's really not financially a worthwhile venture. And a lot of economies just can't hack it. So I think it's kind of ridiculous, personally.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
But whatever.
Yet,
so we might not have an Olympics. Is that what you're saying?
I'm thinking that it's possible that it won't happen. But this is the thing. From a health standpoint, and that is and Cheyenne is right.
Yeah, they do get a
lot of tourism money. That is a very big part of the equation.
It's never enough.
But here's the thing: if the rational thing to do is to cancel the Olympics, but the economic thing to do is to allow it to go on, economics always wins.
But what I'm saying is that Olympics in general are not economically good. They're bad. They're in the red. Every city that does an Olympics ends up significantly in the red for it if they don't have enough reserves to do it. I mean, there are cities that have to build highways in order to accommodate. I mean, this is a major infrastructure development process that takes place years in advance of hosting an Olympics, like up to 10 years in advance, they start preparing for this. And the amount of tourism they get during the Olympics does not come anywhere near what they need to sort of pay for what they're doing. And so
I agree.
Financially, it's not a winner.
So ultimately, do I think that this is going to be canceled? No, I don't. Because again, you're talking about a lot of investment.
But that's more about advertising money,
yes,
and corporate money. That's not what I'm talking about. Is the pain to the municipality. But when you're talking about like Coca-Cola and Nike and all them, yeah, they love that. They love the Olympics.
I definitely agree. But one thing I will say, I mean, I always was under the impression that the Olympics was overblown in terms of what it actually did economically. There is no comparison to the Olympics and the Super Bowl. Now, the Super Bowl actually does stimulate a local economy, at least for a month or two. And that does matter. But again, different sport, different circumstances.
And it doesn't require the same investment.
Correct. There's not this whole infrastructure plan that's only going to be used one time.
Right. It's yes, there's extra security. I mean, yes, there's definitely things that to be done to prepare for a Super Bowl, but you're not hosting thousands of people in dormitories and having a village and it's a whole different thing. It is financially beneficial to do a Super Bowl. It is not to do an Olympics for the city.
I believe Paul is going to be here in a couple of minutes. Paul Ehrlich, the author.
So do you want to do a little intro?
Yes, I think we should. I will just say that you're definitely going to want to stick around afterwards for our Bootlicker of the week. What the hell? I'll just say it. It's Barry Weiss. I've been wanting.
Do people even know who that is?
Oh, they know who she is. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. But again, I thought that when it comes to the environment, this is a topic that needs to be discussed because, again, it's not a question of overpopulation via land mass. It's overpopulation in terms of resources, in terms of where population, concentrated populations are. And South Florida obviously is one, Southern California is another, New York is another. Look, we saw the effects of it during COVID. We saw where the over densely populated areas are and where there was a high concentration of cases and deaths and things like that. So when people say that it's not an issue, I refuse to accept that premise that it's not an issue.
No, it's an issue. There are definitely places that have too many people, but it comes into play also. There's this intersection between overpopulation and environmental justice. And there's issues when you're talking about certain populations that don't have access to healthy food, other populations that do. You have migration patterns of people that are going to be coming from the poor, more desolate places that are going to be most affected by climate crisis. We're going to see a significant refugee increase from climate crisis. And so it's an issue. It's definitely an issue. And look, I'm telling you, all it takes is me spending an hour driving in Pembroke Pines. And I'm like, there are just too many people.
And with that said, we would like to welcome what I would consider a very renowned author and somebody who knows a thing or two about the environment in a way that I don't think a lot of people really think about it. Natural resources it's a serious issue now. And in the state of Florida, it's a very serious issue because we're not talking about the things that are going on that don't make the headlines, like Nestle taking 1 million gallons of water out of one of our only clean drinking water lakes that we have in the state. It's a big deal. And Mr. Ehrlich wrote this book, The Population Boom, back in a very significant year in American history, which is 1968. A lot has obviously changed since then, but there's a lot of relevancy to what he did write about. And so without further ado, the president of the Center for Conservation Biology at Stanford University, Mr. Paul Ehrlich.
And is it Ehrlich or
It's Ehrlich. It's like it was Erlik. It's German. It means honest or honorable, but of course, in my case,
I don't know if I can.
He's on mute. Yeah, no, but I don't know that he's on mute or if he's just having problems with his microphone because I've had problems with that too.
It said my mic was working.
I don't know that.
Let us know.
I don't think that it's
I want to give him a second. I think. Well, he can hear us.
I can hear us.
Knows that we're on. Maybe on like a second delay.
Okay. Well, in my meeting with Gabriel Shipton and Nathan about our Assange event. I was having technical difficulties like that and I couldn't get the microphone to work and it was very frustrating. But what I've learned whenever I have that with these, if I unplug USB for 5 seconds and then replug it back in, somehow it works.
Hey, I gotta give him all the credit in the world. He's,
now can you hear me?
Are you basically saying that, it's hard for older people to deal with technology?
Well, sometimes it can be.
He's laughing at us. But I will say this. My parents were always true to form on that. Nobody ever satisfies that sort of stereotype better than my parents.
You got something figured out there.
He's having...
It says I'm in the show.
Having technical difficulties.
Everyone can see.
Yeah. He's having problems.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is there? I wish there was somebody that would be able to.
I don't know how to do it. It's whatever you're using for your microphone is not selected.
You do hear both? Oh, so we can hear? Oh, that's very interesting. Okay, so then why are we not able to hear?
I don't know. Hold on.
All right, so Paul, it may be something on our end. Give us 1 second. No, audio files are good.
Wait.
I think.
I always see the different ones. No, it's these. I don't understand why we don't hear.
Well, let's see if we can get this figured out.
All right, I'm going to see if I can get Jason. Hold on a second.
Hold on 1 second, Paul.
Just see if
this figured out. Thankfully, it's not your microphone, so obviously it's something on our end. Some type of a connection, maybe from our end. Say something again. See if anything comes
1, 2, 3, 4.
It's still not coming through. Yeah, there's definitely something off. I'm going to try that. Nope, that's not it. surprisingly, this has not happened before. We usually get this thing figured out pretty quickly, so just bear with us 1 second. Oh, the old world of tech. And here I am thinking it's you, but it's actually us. Yes, no, John, we can't hear Paul. That's the issue. We can't hear him. 1, 2, 3. He can hear us. 5. You guys can hear him, but we can't hear him. Can't hear a thing. It's totally blanked. Do you want to go on this end?
No. Just let him. He needs to be reading.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Hi, Jason.
Hello.
Here's Jason, Mr. Techie guy.
I'm tech support.
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so I thought that the 3.
1, 2.
There it is.
He got me.
We got you, Paul.
Oh, okay.
She already checked the mic, so she forgot to check 1 or 2.
I'm staring at a big thing which has been saying you're in the show. Everyone can see and hear you.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry about that. But so that was my husband. That was
I've been
Jason.
through this many times.
Paul, I think the best possible place for us to start, because I would like you to take us back in time to 1968. What was the general reaction from people at the time when your book came out?
Well, the book itself did one thing, and that is that Arthur Godfrey read it, loved it, sent it to Johnny Carson, and Johnny had me on the Tonight Show something like 20 to 25 times.
Wow.
And that produced a reaction. We had started the organization Zero Population Growth, ZPG, and John allowed me to give the address I did it 3 times in a row, I think early in 69. I can't remember exactly when. And when I first went on the show, the ZPG had 6 chapters, and I think something like 600 members. And when the 3 appearances after them, it was 600 chapters and 600,000 members. And the first show resulted in the biggest delivery of mail ever to an address in Menlo Park, California, where the headquarters of ZPG was. And what this taught me is the power of the mass media, because I'd been giving talks on San Francisco Bay Area radio and television stations for some time. But going on the Tonight Show just changed my life, and certainly brought the issue to public attention. The funniest thing, John and I got along very well, and the first time I went on the show, Julius LaRosa was a singer that's probably none of you young people have ever heard of.
All right, you can come on anytime. Keep calling me the young people. Keep it up.
Yeah. Well, he got up after the first split, after the first show, during the commercial break, after the first segment, and jumped and ran in front of John and said, "You guys can't talk about stuff like this on television," because we talked about contraception. And John said, "We just talked about it." And he points to his chest and says, "It gets people up here." And I said, "No, Julius, it gets people down there." And John said, "Yeah, that's right. It gets people down there," pointing in the right direction. And he said, "I don't know what you guys are talking about," and disappeared. And John, that was the last time Julius appeared on the show, but it was funny. We had a good time. And John and I always had a good time.
Let me ask you if you could, just because there's definitely a generational issue in terms of the people who are in this chat and are watching. So if you could just briefly give it like the synopsis of what the population bomb was about, what you were talking about back then, and then we could talk about what has happened and where it has ended up now.
Well, what I was talking about back then is very similar to what all scientists are talking about now. Namely, you cannot grow anything forever on a finite planet, and the Rachel Carson had basically introduced environmental problems to the American public. There was stuff before that, but the literature hadn't taken hold the way Rachel's did. But she did not really discuss in any detail the population dimension of the problem. And I had been emphasizing that that should not be ignored. People will say, the only thing I care about, but that's their interpretation. The book, The Population Bomb, the original title that we gave to Ian Ballantine, who invented the pocketbook, when we wrote it, at his request, by the way, we called it Population, Resources, Environment. And that is still the basic story. It's not all population. It's the biggest problem is overall consumption. And of course, how much you consume is a product, that is a multiplication of how many people there are and how much each individual on average consumes. And a third factor was added by us along in 1970, I think, pointing out that it also depended on what technologies you used to service the consumption. It's very, very simple. It's something that every scientist who has an IQ of over 20 understands. Unhappily, most politicians don't have that high an IQ. And so we're still in the kind of trouble we were in back then, except with much less time to do anything about it.
Yeah.
I really think this is an important conversation, because the misconception that a lot of people have when it comes to the issue of overpopulation
like it's a myth.
Well,
somebody said, "Oh, overpopulation's a myth."
Not even so much that it's a myth. It's this idea that they're thinking about it in terms of general landmass. But as you know, most of the population centers center in very specific areas. We are in South Florida. You are in the Bay Area. There are to say that it's overpopulated is saying it in a very kind way. California is probably an even better example than Florida. Florida is massively overpopulated, especially all over the coastlines. California has the same problem. I think it's like, and quote me, tell me if I'm wrong. If it's like 80 to 90% of California's population is within 10 miles of the coastline, all the way from the top end of the state down to the bottom.
Yeah, but you're missing a basic point. That is, the coastline of California, Florida is going to go underwater. We all know that, but it's not going to go fast. You're going to be able to outwalk it if you're on the Florida thing. But the issue is not people versus space. It's people versus resources. And the resources include the garbage cans, like the atmosphere, where we're putting all the carbon. And the resources include the groundwater that you were mentioning. And what's going to happen from climate disruption, which is just one of the existential threats we face, is yes, sea level is certainly going to rise as it gets warmer. That's basic physics. But much more important is it's already hitting agriculture. We have a population now of on the world of almost 8 billion people, of which roughly 3 billion can't afford to eat well enough to be actually functional, whereas somewhere in the vicinity of 600 to 800 million are actually starving. And now we are attacking agriculture. And agriculture, the food system on the planet, is responsible for about a third of the greenhouse gases that go into the atmosphere. So as we try to increase our food supply, we are attacking our climate. And anybody who has a garden or a tropical fishbowl knows that organisms are tuned, have evolved to fit into certain temperature zones. When you change the temperature very rapidly, you screw up agriculture. And that's what we're in the process of doing, and that's what the data show. A paper by on this general topic just last year had 15,000 scientists sign on to it. But it was the second edition of one that we produced back in the early 1990s. The situation has not changed significantly since the population bomb, except we just had 4 years of the most incompetent administration the world has ever seen in the leading nation, which set us way, way back. So I would say in some ways, we were pushed back before 1968, but at least in 1968, we still had the potential to do something about it. End of sermon.
No, it's true. And
I'm here for it, my friend.
Look, there's also, and that doesn't even, you talk about food production. We also have a significant military industrial complex contribution to our climate crisis that's very massive. But on the food issue, we lack sustainability in agricultural practices all over because sustainable agriculture is not as profitable as industrialized agriculture. And we would all be better off if we were all sustainably farming, gardening, living, more plant-based lives.
Actually, a scientist named Claire Kremen published a year or so ago a really interesting study which shows that you could actually produce as much food with a reasonable agricultural system than with the present industrial one. Whether we'll ever do it, I mean, the big issue isn't could we change our ways in such a way as to make it possible for my great-grandchildren to live in a decent world? And the answer is probably yes. Will we do it? When I look around and I see, for example, that people are fighting over whether to wear masks, when you realize that in order to deal with the existential threats of which climate change is just one, you're going to have to change your entire culture. You're going to have to not have a totally financialized system of economics and economics departments in most universities totally lacking anyone who has a clue about how the world works. The changes that are going to be required are so dramatic, and the response to very sensible things like mask wearing is so stupid that I can't be totally optimistic. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, people are not exactly really very sharp. We're creating policy out of profit and fear instead of, reason. And so that's always problematic. And it's interesting because the mask thing is the one that's the no-brainer to me, because of all the COVID stuff that we've been talking about, that's the one thing we know for sure works. When you cover your face and the germs don't spread, it helps. That's why we've had less flu. That's why everybody has been less sick in general, not just COVID, but this year there's been very low flu outbreaks. So we know it works. But yeah, people just don't want to wrap their heads around it.
All right, we'll dive into it really quick, Paul. I'm sure you've been dealing with this for a very long time. Miss Danger wants to know about the fact that, anytime somebody comes up with a suggestion in terms of how to deal with the rapid changes on this planet, that there's always going to be co-option of your message for the purpose of trying to push sterilization and eugenics. What do you say in regards to people who think that your message is being used in the wrong way, for example?
Well, the message is often used in the wrong way. At Stanford, which I've been at for 65 roughly years, we had a Nobel laureate named Shockley, who said that people are color-coded for quality, and guess which ones were the most high quality. And then when that came out, and that was in, I guess, the 70s or 80s, everybody asked me whenever I gave a talk, isn't it true that we should stop those people who are not good from breeding? And I always used to say, yeah, and anybody who asks that question clearly is in the group that shouldn't breed. And Shirley Feldman and I wrote a book called The Race Bomb specifically to point out that all the racism has no biological basis in fact at all. That in fact, one could make an argument that people with darker skins are, because they're so treated so badly comparatively because of cultural things, that actually they're probably genetically smarter than people with lighter skins because they've had to make out in a tougher environment than those with light skins. But there is zero scientific support for the kind of racism that pollutes the United States and many other countries. Same thing for gender prejudice. It turns out that women, are as capable as men in doing virtually everything that doesn't require full strength, and in many cases they're even good there. But I mean, our evolution led to men being physically somewhat stronger, not necessarily able to live longer. But women around the world don't get a break. There isn't a single country in the world where women have the opportunities and the pay and so on that men get. And interestingly, one of the ways to deal with the population problem, that if we're going to do it humanely, we have to do, one of the first things you should do is give women full rights and opportunities, because it turns out when you do that, they tend to have lower fertility. They tend to choose to have fewer children. So the racism is something one has to deal with in everything in our society, the sexism as well. And if you're interested in seeing to it that we start the kind of slow shrinkage that we must have if the population is ever to be sustainable, one of the first things to work on is women's rights. So winner.
That's interesting. So that's a really interesting correlation. And yes, it's completely commonsensical when I think about it, because if women have equal opportunities, they're going to be pursuing a myriad of other things and not just staying home and breeding.
Right.
And so, right. I mean, that does make sense.
Come on. Who had a choice of having a child or a motorcycle would choose the child? I mean,
no, see, if you said dog or child, I would say, all right, you know.
That's a true Californian.
Okay,
right there.
yes.
And and even to this day, Paul, I still have not seen Easy Rider, but it is a movie that I need to see. I am going to see it one of these days. But, you bring up a really great point about, women not necessarily, feeling the need to, just be homebodies and take care of children. I'm curious, because of the timing of your book, did what was presented on the Tonight Show have any impact when it came to Roe v. Wade? Was that even something that did more or less play some role in terms of that particular landmark legislation a few years later?
I don't think so. The most interesting thing out of Roe versus Wade was the great plunge in crime rates about 20 years after it was passed, because of course wanted children end up often being very much more responsible than unwanted children who are not treated properly. Roe versus Wade, as far as I'm concerned, is primarily an issue in two ways. One is, of course, just plain equity, women being able to make their own choices about how their bodies are operated. And two, anti-abortion laws, particularly in the earlier days, were simply laws that encouraged the murder of women, because as the statistics showed, abortion rates didn't change when you made anti-abortion laws, but women's death rates changed. And opposition, it's a good example. It's not a huge demographic issue. In other words, abortion has never been at a level where it made a significant dent in population statistics. Right. So you want to see significant dents, look at the population composition of France, say, from 1910 to 1930 or something like that. Then war can make dents in population growth, although not really significant ones unless we have a full-scale nuclear war, which is one of the existential threats tied to population quite tightly, which the people who understand what's going on in India and Pakistan realize could end our civilization tomorrow. Climate change will end our civilization if we don't do dramatic things about it in a few decades. But if India and Pakistan go at it with their now hundreds of nuclear weapons, as the most recent studies show, we're all screwed. So,
Vice did a great piece on that about 6-7 years ago. I remember that very well.
We have a question.
We do have an important question. One of the things that we do here in South Florida, I think there are two things at the local level you really can do in terms of how you can help make an impact as far as the climate is concerned. That is, work on a plastic ban. And one of the things that we're doing is building community gardens. If you can speak to the issue of factory farming, I think that probably is... like community gardens can really help reduce the carbon footprint. In terms of factory farming, how much that has played a role in increasing our carbon footprint, maybe as much as anything.
Well, factory farming in general has got one advantage, and that is it was, when it was developed, highly productive, and that did the so-called Green Revolution at great ecological cost, did allow more people to be fed, although fixing up distribution would have done a much better job. And I think that, in my point of view, the best thing about doing gardening and so on is, in part, it cuts the huge fossil fuel input, which makes the food system so bad from the point of view of the food system being able to operate in the right climate. But it also teaches people things. That is, if you've had a farm, if you've had a garden in New York City, say, and you planted palm trees in it, you found in the winter that the palm trees kind of disappeared. And that would bring to you the idea that actually, if you change the temperature, you're going to affect plants, and it's plants that we have to eat. So that changing the temperature rapidly is not a clever idea for a species that somebody called Homo sapiens, the wise man. Of course, clearly the women were the wise ones, but so I'm very much in favor of changing the agricultural system to a more ecologically sustainable one, and spreading agriculture over places, for example, where there are now lawns. I mean, in much of the United States, people take an exotic grass, a foreign grass, and grow it everywhere, rather than growing food or growing native plants that are part of ecosystems that we want to maintain because they support our lives. People don't understand that we are utterly dependent on what now finally ecologists are pointing out, and a few smart economists are taking up the idea of natural capital. That is, we are depleting our natural capital, which is our life support systems, which bring us fresh water, which bring us food, other little things like that we tend to like. And we are getting rid of it as fast as we can. It's as if we were the profligate son of a rich family who inherited a huge amount of money and discovered that he could write a bigger check every year and never look at the balance in his account. And the account is running dry. Good example is the pumping out of aquifers in places like Florida, particularly where when sea level rises, you're going to lose freshwater aquifers just from that. And you're going to lose agricultural land. But again, I don't like the emphasis on sea level rise. People can latch on to that, but the food situation is much more immediate and will be much more difficult to solve. You can always walk away from the sea level rise and build further inland. But if you haven't got food, you can't walk. So
no, it's true. One thing I wanted to ask you about, I was looking at the articles that you sent over, and a huge issue, and we've talked about it before, is biodiversity loss. And what that, it's like everything is connected. We all know everything. Well, not we all know, but I know that everything is connected. And so when you're talking about the extinction of like 1 million species and how that's connected to what we're doing, and I was just wondering if you could talk about that and how that's going to affect us. I mean, obviously, we know certain species, like obviously if there's no bees, we have a problem. But just in general, just loss of all of our critters.
Well, it's not just our critters, of course, because one of the things that's often missed in the discussion of sea level rise is the acidification of the oceans. And for most of us, seafood is very important. Most of us in rich countries, to have a healthy diet, a chunk of seafood is really important. But for many millions of people, it's life itself. In other words, the critical protein for many people, particularly in tropical areas and areas where there are coral reefs, it's artisanal fisheries on coral reefs that supply the critical protein to people. So one of the things we're doing, acidifying the oceans, which comes from putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We're taking past sunlight and using it now. And so that's a critical thing. Also, fresh water and the freshwater and the wetlands of the world are critical in many ways. The wetlands purify the water. Coastal wetlands are often the nurseries for fisheries that support everybody. The forests sequester carbon and change the climate. When people think about, well, who cares if the Amazon is cut down? Well, if I was going to show you out the window here, we have very heavy winds right now off and on in California. And of course, one of the things that's happening is we're changing the climate. There's more drought. And guess what? That leads to more and more intense forest fires. And
of course,
November in 2019, Ann and our second home is in Australia. And we were in Sydney with the forests there burning, on getting the smoke. And then we came back to California, and California was burning. And that's going to get worse and worse and worse. And again, the biodiversity all ties into that. We are part of biodiversity. We depend on all the other organisms to create ecosystems in which human beings can survive and thrive. And wiping out a species is what people focus on, but it's, again, the wrong focus. Wiping out of populations, which precedes the species disappearing, is much more critical. For example, if we wiped out the honeybees in North America, it'd cost them, the last estimate I saw was $20 billion a year, and we'd have a much less nutritious diet. But the bees, if you wiped them out of North America, the species wouldn't have disappeared. It originated in the old world tropics. It's common in Africa. And so what we have to watch is the extermination of populations, and that's what we're seeing all over the place. Again, you young folks wouldn't know, but in Florida, if you drove at night 50 years ago and drove around fast, you'd have to stop the car every once in a while to wipe the bugs off the windshield.
Love bugs. We have love bugs. They're called love bugs.
Yeah. Well, I remember driving through the West in 1945, I think it was, and having to stop to pull the butterflies out of the radiator of the car. That's all gone. When I first went to Costa Rica to do field work 40 years ago, we used to be able to hang up a cloth, put a light on it, and get thousands of moths of hundreds of species coming to it. No more. In other words, we're wiping out the insects, but who cares about bugs? Well, the birds do, and the plants do. And if you like birds and you like plants and you like to eat plants, you want to have the bugs. It's a very complicated system. And of course, the ones that do the best are the ones that are least helpful to us. That is, the parts of biodiversity that thrive are, for example, the rodents like rats who carry our diseases. And the pests that attack our crops, because there are fewer. Because of the laws of thermodynamics, there are fewer things that eat crop pests than there are crop pests. And the smaller populations go first. And so you lose some of the control over the pests and you get less food. Everybody should be taught this stuff starting in middle school at the latest. But our educational system is totally broken. We have the pandemic illustrated that the average human being in North America, and certainly the average congressperson and politician in general, did not understand exponential growth. In other words, they'd say stupid things like, well, there's just 4 cases here. And the speed with which 4 cases can turn into 400,000 cases is almost instantaneous if you understand exponential growth. But people don't.
And this is why I'm not a politician, people, because I understand that. So,
speaking of politicians, Pelosi is your congresswoman. I would imagine that she doesn't really pay any attention to this, much less anything. Could you talk about just the complete disconnect that our elected officials really have to these types of issues? I mean, there are some that are good. Ro Khanna is good.
There are good. And there are some that are good. And they are also, the good ones are faced with dealing with now a large group of insane ones who are not only stupid but evil, and that's not a great situation. But again, it traces back to the broken educational system.
Yes.
One of the worst of the insurrectionists, the traitors that promoted the attack on our capital, got a bachelor's degree from Stanford University, to our utter dismay and disgust. But in part, it's because the university it's probably the best university in the world, and it would be an excellent university for the 19th century. Whether Stanford could ever be dragged into the 20th century is still an open question. It is got no leadership in that direction at all. And you can get all the way through Stanford University, the best university in the world, without knowing what natural capital is, without knowing what the laws of thermodynamics are, without knowing anything basically about how the world works, particularly if you major in the econ department, where there's only one faculty member who understands how the world works. And that's out of dozens.
Considering you've lived quite an extraordinary life, you were born in the Depression, you've lived through multiple wars. I'm curious if there was a particular point in our history where you kind of looked at that moment and said, yeah, this is pretty much where things really started going to hell. I mean, I always point to Jack's assassination as the moment where the country really changed, and it kind of hasn't been the same since then. There was a succession of issues that happened.
I love how he says that like he was there. Like he remembers that.
I'm sure that Paul remembers November 22nd, 1963 very well, but I'm also sure that there may have been other moments. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what would you say really was sort of that, if there was one particular moment where you said, yeah, this is really not going to go well for us?
It was more my interest in the Second World War. My brain was not fully myelinated during the Second World War because I had not yet gotten to the late 20s, when your brain is finally where it physically grown to the point where it should. So I wanted to fight in it. I wished the war would last until I could get into it, because the propaganda was such. But what really led me down the drain was when I started to learn what was going on in terms of the environment and in terms of nuclear war. I was interested in the, I became a pilot. I was not a pilot at the time, but I was during the war very interested in the air forces and the airplanes and so on. And when I started to read about what happened, and particularly the firestorms in the bombing of Hamburg, and in bombing Japanese cities and so on, and I began to put that together with nuclear weapons, I began to understand that we were in a position to actually destroy the entire world, that we could wipe out almost everybody, maybe everybody. And of course, my training was in evolutionary biology and in where human beings came from. That's what I used to lecture on. The way I got involved with the population bomb was that I lectured. I had a 10-week course in evolution. The first 9 weeks were where people had come from, and the last week was where people were going. And those lectures became well known to Stanford students and alumni, and I started getting invitations to talk on Bay Area radio shows and so on about population and the environment. And Dave Brower, who was he was famous for his work in the Sierra Club, and Ian Ballantyne, who invented the pocketbook and was working with Dave on environmental books, came to Ann and me and said, could you write down what you've been saying in your lectures in a short book, and we'll see if we can influence the election in 1968 and show how naive even people like Dave and Ian could be. But Ann and I spent a couple of weeks writing it down, and that's where the population bomb came from. And to my continued dismay and disgust, I allowed Ian to say the book will be much better if it only has one author. And so Ann and I decided we'd leave her name off which was a big mistake as far as I'm concerned. The book may have sold better with only one name, but anyway, we're 65 years into the argument now, so I guess we managed to survive it. But
a lot of people may or may not know the full trajectory of Reagan's presidency. Could you talk about what it was like having him as your governor, and perhaps where people may not recognize that he had a lot to do with a lot of the, I think from an environmental standpoint, he was really somebody who kind of just revolutionized this whole concept of, you're an individual, get yours while you can, and run over everybody you have to in order to get it if need be.
That's a time that that's what I thought we started going backwards. In other words, if you think about it, even Nixon, for example, he was a crook, but he was a smart politician and realized that there was importance in environmental issues. And during his administration, the Republicans started to put in what, on a worldwide basis, they were inadequate, but they were the first laws trying to deal with clean air, clean water, biodiversity, and so on. And Reagan just reversed it. And then, of course, it went steadily downhill from there with some minor changes. But I have to admit that I've known a lot of people in politics. I have had friends in both the Senate and the House and so on. And we all sort of used to think of ourselves as knowledgeable about, after all, if you're interested in the environment, you know that the big issues are political. The changes that have to be made are not, we don't need to know any more science to know what we ought to be doing. We already know what we ought to be doing. The issue is, why in hell aren't we doing it? But none of us, I don't have a single friend who would claim that he foresaw what a disaster Trump could create. I mean, that is beyond belief, and it's still beyond belief. I mean, after all, you have hundreds of morons in political positions in Washington who refuse to even look at the causes of something we all observed and almost wiped them out. I mean, the levels of evil and stupidity that have been created by Donald, whatever his name is, are beyond belief. And I feel really, by the way, I once met Joe Biden, had a very high opinion of him. Ann and I had a discussion with him in an empty stairwell on Lake Como in Italy. He would never remember it. He was a senator at the time, but we were both impressed. But he is faced basically with what Abraham Lincoln was faced with, if you know the history of the 1840s, 50s, and 60s.
He does, because he's that guy.
And I must say, I think he's done a wonderful job, better than I thought he would. But boy, it's a knife-edge issue whether we're just going to go down the drain politically and not do anything at all about the existential threats to humanity and to our children.
That's a great segue. So what is your opinion of the Green New Deal? I mean, obviously it's a very wide-reaching piece of legislation, but on its surface, obviously the ideas behind it, which, Jen and I both agree, the idea of moving forward with a infrastructure plan that centers around clean energy jobs, I mean, obviously it's one step in the right direction. But on a grander scale, I'm curious as to how you feel that legislation has been crafted, and if it is something that has potential, because it does seem like the millennial and Gen Z generations are fully on board with the direction we need to go in as far as the environment is concerned.
Should have asked, that's a question I would have to ask Ann, because she follows that stuff closely. You summarized my view in your first sentence. One step in the right direction, a small step in the right direction. In other words,
what's the most critical thing to do, Paul? Like what would be, like, if you could wave a magic wand, like what would be the first thing that we would really need to do to set things in motion?
I would start on a massive campaign, A, to educate the public, B, for example, people talk about how we got to go to electric cars. What we have to go to is mutual ownership of cars, maybe 12 people per car, and using them forever and only for certain kinds of things, redesigning our cities away, I mean the world's cities, away from suburbs and spread, concentrating where the people are. The Chinese have plans to pave the entire world in their, I can't remember the name of the program. You know, they try to take over Africa. Sorry, senior moment. I can't remember the name of their famous plan. It's replacing the Silk Road with freeways, basically, because after all, cars contribute to climate change not just by what they burn. They spew rubber into the air. The rubber has to come from somewhere. They have to be manufactured. You have to lay down roads, which is always laid over biodiversity. And we have to start a program of stop at one child for a long time to gradually get the human population down to a sustainable level. There's a very famous economist in England who just did a huge study. His name is Partha Dasgupta, and he just did a huge study for the British government on the economics of biodiversity. Partha thinks we might manage to create a sustainable world at, I think, about a Mexican level of standard of living if we had about 3.5 billion people, less than half the number we have now. An estimate that Anne and I and Gretchen Daly made in the 1990s was 2 billion, and maybe 1.5 billion if you wanted to be safe. But the point is, there is nobody who's looked at the situation who doesn't think there should be, to be safe, should be many fewer people than today. What the actual number will be can be decided during the next 30, 40, or 50 years while we move in that direction and decide what the target is as we get to know more about what the problems are of creating a shrinking population, an economy that is based on shrinkage, not on growth, an economy where it is not necessary for everyone to have a cell phone, a new one every 3 months. I mean, the super consuming life, I'll tell you something you can't know, and that is, from the point of view of basic living, I was as happy in 1956 as I am today, or happier. For example, I had a car. I had a refrigerator that would keep beer cold. I actually had a television set that you could see stuff on. It wasn't color yet. But the things that make your life reasonable were all available back then, when the world had half the people that it has today. Economists have looked at this carefully. There is absolutely no gain in well-being or pleasure or happiness once you have the basic things, the basic shelter, food, some opportunity for education and entertainment, and so on. The multiplying of the GDP in countries like the US, UK, Europe, Japan, and so on did not bring happiness to people, did not bring well-being. So we're stuck in an insane system. And until we get people to realize it and ask what they really want out of life, in 1956, you could make love just like today, maybe even better if you're my age.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that we can look at this and say, is it really population or is it overconsumption? And then you can break it down and look at, obviously in this country, we consume way more than everybody else. Like we're beyond overconsumption. And I think some places are better at managing that than others. And it's a balance between the amount of population and the amount that each person is consuming. But I don't think it's something where if we just all drive electric cars and compost, that everything's going to be okay, because these are things that have to be dealt with on a massive scale at a government level and really deal with massive systems. It's not a matter of everybody recycling.
You're correct. In fact, for most of our history, if you want to just look at Homo sapiens, modern human beings, We have a 300,000 year history, almost all of it as small group hunter-gatherers. We were, until 12,000 years ago or so, when the agricultural revolution started, we lived in very small groups, sometimes as many as 100 or 150, but they were equitable. Nobody could be rich. Nobody could hold slaves because you're moving around all the time. Hunter-gatherers don't stay in one place. And all of our big problems trace to two revolutions, the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. And we're a small group animal that has not had time to evolve, even culturally, how to perform as a large group animal. We're used to living with people of the same kind, the same genetic background, the same color, the same language, and so on. And now we're trying to live in groups of millions and billions. And it's crystal clear we can't do it. But if people realized that, then they might work harder to try and get back more of the cooperation, more of the equity that in a hunter-gatherer group, you don't have kings and queens. You have a hunt leader who's the best person at tracking. You have a medicine woman who's the one who really understands which plants can give you relieve your headache, etc. You had somebody who everybody liked who was the dispute solver, and so on. And a totally different system, which we evolved with. And now we can't sit. For example, one of the important ethical issues that I've never seen discussed in the mass media are borders ethical. The old story, how did our oil get under their sand? The resources are not evenly distributed. How should we share them? Should we have a state system in which you keep other people out, or don't deal with it? And as I think I heard you talking earlier, just before I got my voice on this show, the migration situation today is a huge pain in the butt for the government, and it's nothing compared to what's coming. In other words, the whole issue of borders and migration and the ethics of it and the ethics of rich and poor are going to be huge soon, and we're not doing anything to prepare for it or think about it.
We're just going to build bigger facilities in which to incarcerate the people as they come across the border and find a way to profit off of them in the process. That would be my guess.
Well, what are the Europeans going to do when the people from the Middle East keep coming and the Africans have to move up there? One of the really smart economists in the world is Scott Barrett at Columbia, and we've talked casually about what kind of insurance system the countries ought to have, so that when a huge burst of migration comes into Greece or comes into Spain, how the other countries will help deal with it and distribute the people and take care of them and so on. And these things are not being discussed even at the EU level, as far as I know.
Yeah. And what's interesting is we keep, we're learning this, like what you were talking about is very interesting, because it's really that tribal sort of, our tribal ancestry and how we really are supposed to be working together collectively. And yet we're still going into indigenous places and taking over their sort of, equal, equitable tribal system and putting in big agriculture, taking down their trees, taking over, like they're doing things infinitely better. And yet we're still pushing this system that we now know is creating this mess that we're in. And we're still doing it.
Think of what the Western Hemisphere would be like if we hadn't had our microbial allies. In other words, there were millions and millions of people in the Western Hemisphere. There were big cities. There was lots of sustainable agriculture. And we came in and with smallpox and other diseases wiped them out, basically, and replaced them with our unsustainable system. What can I say? We got a lot of problems. We're going to sure as hell have to try and educate people about them, but whether we can succeed. Many years ago when people said, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? I would say I am optimistic about what we could do. I'm pessimistic about what we will do. I have to say now, my pessimism, particularly seeing what Trump did and continues to do, and the morons that follow him, has depressed me almost beyond thinking there's any, and this is something true of most of my colleagues, can't see a path to a sustainable future. And that's grim.
I feel inspired a lot by the younger people, by the kids of the Sunrise Movement, by the kids that deal with the climate lobby and all of that stuff, because they are really taking this issue on. And, we'll see if that ever amounts to real change, real policy, affecting better governance. But the kids these days, like the kids that worked on my campaign, they're really motivated and they really do care. So, I mean, that's what I look at when I feel a little bit defeatist and I see the kids out and they're still taking a stand and they get it. And they're a lot more informed about things than I was at that age. So, I mean, that's my sense of optimism, is that I see a lot of the young people really standing up.
Well, I agree with that. But both of us wonder whether they can actually get the job done.
Yes.
Are there enough of them? And
Yes.
will people listen to them? But, I keep doing things like this because I hope maybe we can get the job done. I just can't be super optimistic about it.
Yeah, I'm with you, but that's why we're doing this show. That's why we do this show. We have
That's exactly why I'm here.
And
I could be having a drink right now,
Go have a drink. Oh my God! Well, we'll wrap up so you can go have a beverage.
And I will leave.
Oh my
you with
God!
this.
It's happy hour out there. It's happy. He's well into happy hour in California.
I will say this, Paul, and I'll leave you with this. I do think that our greatest asset and our greatest detriment at the same time is technology. I do think one of the real downsides to every person now having a cell phone, especially, and I'm sure you would agree with this, especially people who end up getting a cell phone way too early in their cognitive development, it stunts a lot of growth. On top of that, a lot of people are not opening books the way they used to.
It may actually be involved in the increase in nearsightedness that we're having in the world. And that may be also because of artificial light, but also maybe people not looking into the distance. But that's one of I could send you a wonderful paper about the mismatch, because we've brought hunter-gatherer genes into a McDonald's world. That's why people have braces. Why do you figure that human beings need braces? Because their jaws have been shrinking dramatically since the agricultural revolution, because they don't get the right sleep and exercise.
Right.
And
well,
so
I know we don't get the
Wisdom
nutrition.
teeth.
Look, what is the nutritional content of a red pepper today is not the same as it was when I was a kid. And so when you see things like vision issues, increase in juvenile diabetes, you see all of these. Obviously we don't have healthcare as a priority here either, but a lot of this to me has to do with depleting the nutrients in our food and the chemicals in our soil and our water.
One of the main reasons the nutrients are going out of our food is the carbon going into the atmosphere, because the plants don't spend as much time sucking up the other nutrients they need, because they're able to get the energy they need from the CO2. What can I say?
It's all connected, but so I'm right. We are having less nutritional value to our food.
Oh yeah, it's one of the big consequences of climate change, of the greenhouse gases. But I can tell you, and I'll have to leave after this, but the solution to all of this, the solution is drink really good wine and keep your internal environment in good shape while the external goes down the drain. So that's Dr. Ehrlich's prescription.
Thank you. And I told you it was Ehrlich and not Ehrlich.
Okay, Ehrlich.
Ehrlich.
Knew that.
Remember, Ehrlich means honest or honorable in German, and with me, it's false advertising. Take care.
You have been an absolutely fantastic
guest.
Thank you so
much.
We certainly hope you will come back. Please, guys, if you haven't...
I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I'd love to come back sometime.
Thank you,
The
Paul.
Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich.
Ehrlich. Ehrlich. Why can't you say Ehrlich?
Just Ehrlich. E-R-L-I-K. Yes.
The H is silent.
Oh, and now I'm going to really tick her off.
Both H's are silent.
I went to Rutgers, and my education should have shown a lot better.
Thank you so much.
I lived in New Jersey in those days. Take care.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
That's a conversation for next time. New Jersey.
I went to Rutgers. We know you went to Rutgers.
Well, look, there's no question that he comes from a different time, but he's definitely.
You make it sound like a time traveler.
No, because there are people in the chat who have their opinions about whether or not he's again he's a classic liberal from California. And he's somebody who truly values education.
I don't know why you would label him as a liberal.
Well, no, again,
that's kind of mean.
No, he's a liberal values from the standpoint that, somebody like Trump who becomes our president and just completely disregards, the value of, again, I don't judge people necessarily based on the way, that they're, again, that's let people have their opinion. That's fine. We don't have to agree with the chat.
I'm just looking.
Yeah. Again, people have their opinion. But what I'm saying is his viewpoint is very much on the blue side of things. He's very much a Democrat. There's no question that he tried to find something favorable in Biden. I didn't want to get into the weeds on that. I do not think Biden is doing a good job. I think he's okay at best, and that's not really saying much. If he happens to think Biden is doing a really good job, that's his opinion. Doesn't mean we have to agree with him.
I really wish people would stop with this all or nothing mentality to engaging with other humans. Nobody is always right. Nobody is always wrong. It's all just a discussion.
And here is a guy who says he's been at Stanford University. Is it the best school in the world? No. Is it one of the top 10 schools in the world? Yes. And so by that extension, this is somebody who has seen it all. I mean, he has seen it all.
And it sounds like he's an evolutionary biologist.
Yes.
That's somebody who's knowledgeable about how the world works.
But he really did, he really got into it in terms of his belief that everything really started to change when Reagan came on the scene and started really building up this whole kill or be killed mindset about life. It is not about worrying whether or not what you're doing is going to hurt other people. It's about get yours now while you can. No questions asked.
Just completely unbridled greed capitalism.
Correct.
I mean, and we're still in that. That's the problem.
That is correct. And we are trying to find a way out of it.
Why is there hating going on in my comment room?
I'll let people have fun.
They're not. They're being mean. Why do people have to be haters? Don't be haters.
Cheyenne, we would never do that to you. We will never compare a classic liberal to Rave Dubin. Rave Dubin. By the way, for those of you who may not know, Dave had reached out to Jen on social media, lending his opinion, and we had actually asked him to come on the podcast, and instead he wanted to peddle his book. And I said, sure, why don't you?
What was his opinion again? I forget.
It had to do.
What was this about? What was?
I don't remember the extent of it. All I do remember.
He's a shyster. I have no.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I said, you'll read his book. And then he'll come on the podcast and we'll talk about it. And of course, he didn't respond.
I'm not reading his book.
No.
And I wouldn't read his book anyway. I have a backlog of books from really credible people. I'm not sticking that kind of nonsense in my mix.
But that was a great conversation. I really thought, we really got a lot out of it. I think he really, again, I like to hear from people who really have seen a lot, and we should respect our elders and where they've come from and what they have seen. And he truly has seen a lot. Now, granted, do I think he was hyperbolic to some degree talking about Trump? Yes and no.
Trump is horrible for the environment.
But when it comes to, I've always maintained that the worst part of Trump's presidency, his position on the environment was, it was unforgivable.
Yeah.
That's how bad.
That's the thing. So where are we with our
We have one more component, a couple of things that we want to talk about.
Okay. So I saw this article And it just made me laugh. And I had to do a double take because I just thought that was really funny. Like, yeah, we're finally getting out of Afghanistan. And it's like that thing with the ex that they leave something at your house so that you have an excuse to come back. So I found that very, very amusing. And this isn't even an Onion article. This is really rich, guys. U.S. accuses senior officials and politicians in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras of corruption. So I had to bring back my pot kettle, you're black little cartoon, because the idea that we would be accusing anybody of corruption is so like, and people, you can't make this. And that's actual news right there.
And it's the irony of the two articles, because, the one thing that I would have disagreed with Paul on, we didn't really get a chance to get into it per se, but the military industrial complex is as responsible for as much of the climate crisis as anything. The way they have just run roughshod over the whole globe. And we don't know for sure if we're going to get out of Afghanistan, but frankly, we shouldn't be anywhere. We've got 1,000 bases all over the world, and for no reason.
We can't take care of our own people here. Why don't we focus on that? Why don't we focus on that? And then we'll worry about, what other people are doing.
And exactly. So if you're going to worry about the politicians in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, one of the common themes with these three countries.
They're very corrupt there.
And this is where this is one of the primary areas where we get our narcotics from.
We taught them everything they know there.
And so the idea that we're going to point the finger at them, yet we still have a drug war going on, is just insane.
And it's our choice, by the way.
Correct.
This is all our choice. The reason that these countries are in the chaos that they're in, it's like, let's say I walk up to a hornet's nest and hit it with a baseball bat, and then I'm surprised that the hornets are swarming all outside of their nest and going crazy. Yeah, if we would leave a lot of these places alone, they wouldn't be in the mess they are. But the irony of us, of our country accusing them of being corrupt is just, you can't make this
It's
up.
very rich. You know what we'll have to do? We'll have to come up with a segment of something Ted Cruz would say, almost like a Ted Cruzism of sorts.
Okay, well,
we could definitely do something like that. Ted Cruz is he is the biggest laughing stock.
You're going on a sidetrack, but you have to admit you like my little
pot kettle. It was a good one. That was good. So the last segment of the night, which I thought was very important, because again, as you guys know, and it's going to continue.
We got our Bootlicker.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is going to continue to be discussed at length for quite some time. It's a very serious problem, but without question, if you're really looking for who the biggest hack of hacks is when it comes to this kind of issue, Bari Weiss, to me, completely takes the cake. She is our bootlicker of the week. I have been wanting to nail this sucker to the wall for a long time.
But explain why. Now, this particular tweet or whatever message is not current. I pulled it, but this is her general position.
Correct.
On the Israel-Palestine issue. Basically, she just thinks that Palestinian blood is just merely collateral damage of the necessity of a Jewish state.
The reason why I really wanted to bring this up,
yeah,
and I think it's very important, and this is something that you can speak on, as I'm sure a lot of others will speak on, but they never say it loud enough, and that is Bari Weiss is the type of Jew that really fans the anti-Semitism fire. And this is somebody who believes that the Jews are the chosen people and that they should be able to do whatever they want. And by just gleefully suggesting that apartheid and downright genocide be enacted on the Palestinian people is okay, without even thinking about it. Just completely saying, yeah, we want an ethnocentric state.
It's just a matter of, look, as she said here, this is an unspeakable tragedy. It is also one of the unavoidable burdens of political power, of Zionism's dream turned into the reality of self-determination.
So Palestinian blood must be spilled in order for the Zionists to get what they want.
But here's the thing. What about the self-determination of the Palestinian people, Barry? What about the self-determination of the people that are being born into the world's largest open-air prison, Barry? So I guess they don't get the right of self-determination.
Japanese internment comes to mind.
But you know what? Like, here's the thing. Even the people, like, even if you're a pro-Israel and you support the idea of a Jewish state, to be as callous and disregarding of what is going on there since 2014 specifically. I mean, and this is a lot of this is right-wing Netanyahu stuff that's going on that is taking it to an extreme. To be that cavalier and to talk like that, like that's just collateral damage, is so disgusting to me. It's shameful. And you know what, Barry? At least pretend that you give a crap. Why not just pretend that you give a crap? But yeah, so this
person has used every single tool in her Swiss Army knife arsenal that she can use to try to feign some type of sympathy. Look,
this is not the only person with this position, by the way.
No,
let's be fair. This is symbolic
but she's just one of the absolute worst. She has absolutely to no end. She is as insufferable and despicable as anyone you're ever going to see.
Did you like how I did that?
Great job. No, she's, she uses her wokeness and the fact that she is a member of the LGBT community as a means of being able to say what she wants.
So she's a Jewish lesbian, so therefore it's okay for her to say Palestinians should be able to be killed.
Oh, she put out a message the other day that was so insufferable about her having a child. And this is a person who lives an immensely privileged life.
All right, well,
and so it
not
again,
liking that.
No. So again, it just speaks to the bigger problem here, which is they've been able to get away with it for so long. And I always said, I don't care what you are, you could be you could be any place on the spectrum. I don't give a damn. Are you a good person? That's all that matters to me. But people are using identity as a weapon. And Barry Weiss is a great example of that. And she's been doing it for years now. And whether you like Tulsi Gabbard or not is not the point. When she went on Joe Rogan's show and tried to paint Tulsi as an Assad toady and couldn't even define it, it was so clear as day that she got that talking point from whoever she deals with in the editorial room.
I would assume
at the New York
sounds
Times.
like Clinton-esque.
Very much so.
It's it's like the Jewish liaison to the Clintonian world.
Never meets a war she doesn't like and would not advocate for. And again, this is the problem. When you allow somebody like her to have a microphone and project this nonsense, if you want to know why anti-Semitism fires get stoked, it's because of people like this.
Yes.
And when you're not...
She is quite a loathsome Jew.
She is.
It's very unfortunate. I don't want to claim her as my tribe.
Listen, let's put it this way. If you think Deborah Messing is an insufferable Jew, she's this times 10. She's Deborah Messing times 10. Like that's how much worse it gets.
People.
Yeah. Elvira, and you really don't want to know who
okay,
this
so
person
this is a woman who is, I'm going to quote, journalist, worked as an op-ed writer, a columnist for the New York Times. She resigned like a year and a half ago. There was this big controversy and she stepped down because
cancel culture.
Yeah, she stepped down because of this whole controversy or whatever. And I always just kind of thought, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But I'm very unimpressed with her. She is obviously a very neoliberal Zionist person. And so I don't support that. I am in the process of trying to put together a panel to discuss Israel, or at least get Rania on here. But right now, all my people that I want to talk to about Israel are all basically sitting on 24/7 streaming about Israel. So right now that there's a ceasefire, maybe I'll be able to get somebody to come on and talk about that. Let's talk about what's going on this week. Guys, if you're local, we need help at Mobile School Pantry tomorrow. I believe it's at West Hollywood Elementary tomorrow. Is that correct? Do you know? Or you're not even paying attention to anything right now?
I had to check something on Barry for a second, but please continue.
Okay, I'm trying to talk about Mobile School Pantry now.
Yes, so Mobile School Pantry.
We have Mobile School Pantry at West Hollywood, though, I believe.
Yes.
I'm going to double check.
Well, usually it rotates.
I'm going to double check and make sure. But guys, if you're around, please meet us out. If you can help in Pompano at the packing, that's and all of this is on our website. Yes, tomorrow, West Hollywood Elementary School, 3:15. I will be there helping do food distribution. If you can help packing, it's at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning at Edward Merrick Market, which is Dock 26, 1255 West Atlantic Boulevard in Pompano Beach. This is also on our website, or at least it should be on our website.
One would hope.
One would hope. So that's going on. Also, guys, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. That is free. If you are so inclined to become a Patreon, that would be amazing.
Our content and helps us spread the word.
We have a few different tiers. You could be a Patreon for $1 a month. However, for people that are $5 and $10 a month Patreons, this month we are having our first ever members only Zoom call. We're going to have a conversation with our Zoom members. You guys can come on. We could talk. You could give us suggestions. And I'm also going to be having presentations that are going to be exclusive to our members. This month, we're going to be having a presentation by Mona Lisa Weber of Probation Station. She's going to be doing a presentation on food insecurity and the connection between food insecurity and the school to prison pipeline, because it's connected. It's all connected. So if you are a member between now and May 26th, Wednesday night, 7:00, is going to be our first members only Zoom call. So that's, next Wednesday. And I think that's really the only thing that I have on my calendar that other than Mobile School Pantry tomorrow. And my dogs are getting groomed.
That should be lovely.
Well, they stink, so they need to.
Well.
Oh, and for people who don't know, I was contacted by Julian Assange's brother. He and his father, John Shipton, so it's John and Gabriel Shipton, will be traveling to the States. They're going to be doing sort of an informational discussion tour, talking about Julian's case and really trying to spread the word. We will be hosting that here. They reached out to me, so I was very honored about that. I'm bringing together some different groups down here, and we're organizing a panel discussion. It will be on June 6th. It will be Gabriel and John Shipton, that's his brother and father, working on 2 other panelists. And the location is to be determined, but it'll probably be something in the vein of like the Unitarian Church, either in Dade or Broward. And that's what we're working on. So that's June 6th. So everybody pay attention for that when that comes up. And it will be an evening program. I would say probably 7 to 9 or something like that. But we're waiting on location confirmation. But I'd love people to come out for that.
Cage, thank you so much for being a part of the live stream. Needless to say, Jen has a very strong relationship with Vosh.
I love him. I do. I find him just so incredibly charming.
All I can say to anybody, if you have a problem with Vosh and you're not out there raising $300,000 for Palestinian families in need right now,
then shut the F up.
Sit down.
Take a seat, man. Down. Take a seat, Zone.
Because he has, especially... I'm not gonna say his name. There's a person in media right now who's basically like coming at, he's stepping in hot water. I'm not a fan of him. Not gonna say his name, but Vosh has really proven himself beyond any doubt that his intentions are good and that he really cares about people.
Yes.
And I could not believe how much money he raised. And
and by the way, I was watching him. He had on the head of the organization that he was raising money for. So the head of the Palestinian Children's Defense Fund. And while he was talking to him, as the guy was talking, they raised another $12,000. And it was only in like 15 minutes. So you know what, people?
I still say that if Jen ever were to run for office again, having somebody like Vosh do a fundraiser for her might by itself be enough to put her where she needs to be.
But I'm always happy to see Vosh people over here. And truthfully, I knew that those were similar to my people. Those are my people, other than they're younger and gaming.
Yes.
But other than the younger and gaming aspect, a lot of the Vosh people are the same as our people.
Well, again,
I just don't know their gaming stuff. They talk and there's a whole different language and the whole thing. Like there's definitely stuff I don't understand over there. I feel like I almost need like a translator to go into Vosh world.
To have somebody like that every time when they come on here, and that I think is very important.
And I always ask him stuff, and he always, it's so funny. And I think for him, it's almost like, I think he recognizes that I'm sort of like, I'm just like this old cute lady. And I'll ask him something about one of his comments and he blushes, like he gets almost like embarrassed, like he doesn't know how to explain it. I think he's just adorable. I don't care what anybody else says.
If that from
love him.
Jack, Cage, Deke Smack, Mountain Jam, any of you guys who are big supporters of Vosh, if you like our content, we would love for you to become a Patreon member.
Or just subscribe.
Share, do whatever you got to do. And yes, the puppy's name.
Oh,
Puppy.
she's not a puppy. She's 11, and that's Lulu. And she's sort of like the little mascot. I do have generational change stickers with Lulu on them.
And one more thing, guys, for those of you who are big supporters of Vosh, if you haven't seen the live stream between Jen and Vosh yet, because a lot of them may have just been coming on from the birthday bash.
Right. Yeah, we did a live stream
about 3 months ago.
Yeah, that was really fun. That was the first time. I was a little starstruck with him. It's so funny. And he's so much younger that it's like, I think it's, and he is not, I don't think he fancies himself like a celebrity person, but yeah. And so, yeah, if you guys are not Patreons and you would like to support, please do so. What do we have coming up on Monday?
I actually don't know off the top of my head. I don't know if we have a guest lined up on Monday as of yet.
John, what do we have? Hey, John, what do we have on Monday?
Yes.
And I don't know what's scheduled coming up at all in the next week. So I'm not on this.
Well, we'll work on it.
And hopefully we'll get hold of our own calendar and be able to update it as
yes, I was already given a message about how to do it.
So. Okay, because that's now going to be our job. So we're going to keep our calendar updated.
In 10 minutes, our favorite show comes on.
Yeah, we have to watch Law and Order.
Criminal.
Organized crime.
Organized crime. I just say criminal.
Organized crime. No.
Right. Big fan of Chris Maloney.
And you're going to have to maybe do something about dinner.
Yeah, got to eat some food. We'll see you soon.
Bye, all.
Good night, guys.
Come to Mobile School Pantry.
Come to Mobile School Pantry.